So for those of you who don't know me already, my name is Debbie Stine. I am the uh, founder and the chief instructor for the newly formed Science and Technology Policy Academy, formed as a result of the pandemic when all the workshops I did in person went online. The advantage of that is I now get to talk to people from all over the United States and sometimes even other countries, which is fun. So I'm going to just introduce at the beginning the classes we have coming up. So the next class is starting this month, actually just a few weeks, because amazingly today is April 1st. And I should have thought of an April Fool's joke, but I'm so sorry. Maybe somebody can throw one into the chat. So this is we're coming up on the deadline Monday to sign up for the level 2 class. So we have a strong cohort there. Also, if there's some of my former students here who were previously in level 2 but didn't quite finish all the work, you can let me know and you can participate in the Q&A sessions for that. So all the classes, the videos online, and then we have a weekly Q&A that will begin the week of April 12th. Voice registration, students who are registered will vote in terms of the day and time for the class. NSPN members get 50% off for all these classes that are offered directly by the Academy. Then we also have our level 3 class coming up, which is on analytical methods, benefit cost analysis, cost effectiveness, and risk analysis. Then there are a series of two-day live workshops that I'll be four workshops in a row beginning in April, May, June, July, that also cover some of the same material. So if you like your material live instead of through video, please visit the NIH page to register for that class, those series of courses. There's a discount there if you arrive early. The NSPN discount does not apply, though, to the NIH classes. Then we have a new certificate program. So if you sign up for all 4 classes at the same time, then you can get immediate access to on-demand access to all the class videos and receive a certificate if you complete all 4 classes. And then we have, for the first time, our level 1 class on our website through video that'll be offered in June. So a lot of people asked for that last time. So now it is here for you to register. So after those advertisements, I'm now going to move on to introducing our speakers. So our goal for today is to learn how to get policy experience outside of DC. So oftentimes, we really think that is like the first place to go for policy experience. But I myself began working on policy back in Texas. I was working for the Texas Air Control Board, the State Air Pollution Agency at the same time, and I was very involved with the League of Women Voters. And that's where I first gave my testimony to the Texas legislature, talked about volcanoes, which was this thing that was burning hazardous waste in the Gulf of Mexico. And so that's where I basically got addicted to it. So we're going to, from these 4 speakers, you're going to hear about how they are involved with policy outside of DC and how you can get experience that will help you gain fellowships, jobs, that kind of thing. So we have Kenya Goodson, who is from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. She is on the, besides teaching, she is on the board of directors for the Black Warrior River Keepers, Conservation Alabama, the Citizens Climate Lobby, and I don't know, I say that the Cahaba River Society. Am I close enough? Yeah, thank you very much. Our speaker after that will be Jeff Warren, who started out as a geologist, and then he has done all sorts of different state level science policy positions in North Carolina, and is currently the executive director at the North Carolina Policy Collaboratory. Allison Smith is the Assistant Director of the Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability for the Louisville Metro Government. And she works on brownfields, community engagement, does sustainability activities. And last but not least is Artie Garg, a former fellow of mine. So I knew her when she was young. Not that you're old now, Artie. Uh, but she is the founder. I'm very proud of her because she's the founder and chair of this organization called Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally. She practices what she preaches because she's on the Community Services Commission for Hayward. And she does like a real life job in AI for Hewlett Packard as well. So plus she's got 2 kids. So clearly she is a busy, busy woman. And she's going to tell us about all the great resources that ESAL has um, um, throughout the program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, which is Kenya. So Kenya, go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. Again, my name is Dr. Kenya Goodson. I'm a native of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Thank you all so much for coming. And I did notice that we have a lot of PhD students who are learning about different careers in policy outside of DC. Well, that's really good. And I'm saying that it's a good time for you to actually start doing that instead of what I did it on the other end of my PhD experience. So you guys are doing a really good job by getting the information that you need to inform your decisions about what you want to do, especially if you are looking to work outside of academia. So, with that being said, I just wanted to kind of share my story to see if it resonates with anyone. So, I've always been interested in math and science, throughout most of my education. But as a college student, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so I was good in math and science. I was a chemistry major at a HBCU here in Tuscaloosa. When I graduated, I had one of those introspective introspective times and meetings with myself to say, okay, what are you going to do with your career? And I always enjoyed working with the community, but I like science. And so I determined that I would go into environmental science. And so I went and got my master's in environmental management. And then I started working as a regulator. So it was my first real job. I worked for the Alabama Department of Public Health. I loved that job, loved what I did. I felt like I was giving back to the community. I was making sure that they were safe and that they adhered to environmental policy and regulations. And so that's what I wanted to do with my career. So I decided to go on and get my PhD. And once I did that, I went to DC. I actually went there for a couple of years. Things didn't quite turn out. If you look at my blog, you'll see that my story on the blog, you'll see that. And I ended up coming back to Alabama, and I got into education, and I loved it. Loved working with students. Loved teaching them about the environment and why it's important. But I also wanted to use my expertise and my experience to do other things to work in my community. So I reached out to the executive director of the Black Warrior Riverkeeper when I came back to Alabama in 2017. And to make a long story short, I got involved with them. I started off as a technical on their technical advisory board. And what that is where you have scientists and people that are in the field that the river keepers go to for their expertise. Um, and so I was on the technical advisory board for about a year. And so they asked me if I would be a board director and on the board of directors. And I said yes. And so, as a board member, I did a lot of work around environmental education. So, I invited, the river keepers to come to sessions and talk to students about environmental careers. And then we also, as board members, are involved in the decision-making processes of of the decisions that we made around the Black Warrior River Keepers. And so the River Keepers are designed, and we have them all over the country, all over the world, actually. They patrol our particular watersheds to make sure that they are safe from polluters and environmental pollution. And so the Riverkeeper, they operate generally under the Clean Water Act, where you have people who are citizens that can actually sue polluters for polluting your polluting our waters in our watershed. And so we go after polluters. We also educate the community on what's going on in our watersheds. One of the major issues that we're talking about now is the coal ash issue in our state, where they put coal ash in unlined pits, and it seeps into the groundwater sources and into our surface waters. So that's like one of the main issues that we talk about, of many. Some of the other issues that we look into is sanitation, making sure that you don't have sewage disposal in our watershed and in our rivers. So those are just some of the things that we do with the Black Warrior Riverkeeper. And so as I begin to work with them, I've been a member for 4 years. It doesn't seem like it's been that long. I started getting involved with other organizations. So as Dr. Steins mentioned, I'm a part of 2 other environmental organizations as a board member. And then I'm also the co-leader and co-founder of the Tuscaloosa chapter of the Citizens Climate Lobby. And so what we do is we lobby Congress for climate change policy. And I just saw today that they introduced the bill again. So we'll probably talk about that later on today. So that's kind of my story. I just kind of got introduced into doing environmental policy work as a volunteer. And that's what I do now. And so I hope I didn't take too much time. You said 7 minutes, Dr. Stein. So that's kind of my story. So
Great. No, that's perfect. Thank you
okay.
very much. So our next speaker is Jeff Warren.
Thank you, Dr. Stein. And Dr. Goodson, you and I share a mutual love of the state of Alabama.
Okay, great.
Although I got my master's at that other university down south in the southern part of the state. But it was nice to hear the Black Warrior Basin, the Black Warrior River, and the Cahaba River. My wife's family still lives in Birmingham. So good evening. Thank you, Dr. Stein, for inviting me. It's nice to see the other panelists. Like Dr. Goodson, I'm going to just tell you a story. I almost feel like it's a fireside chat. I'm bundled up outside here because we have some work going on inside and it's noisy. I made the decision to pursue science policy. I did a career move after my master's degree, and I went to Houston, Texas. I'm a geologist by training, and I started with Phillips Petroleum in Houston, and got the opportunity to leave that after a couple of years and go get my PhD. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to do science policy because there's just something inside of me speaking to me. I don't even know what this career path is. I don't even know how to define science policy. It just seems like something I want to do. I'm a scientist. I like policy. I like politics. I like to talk. I like to meet people. So I started at Carolina in 99, geology. And I decided, okay, my late father always reminded me, if you're going to start cobbling together experience and jobs, treat it like a chess game. And so don't make a wasted move. Any move without a strategy is a wasted move. So, anytime you're looking at an internship or you're looking at a job, even if it's a part-time job during the semester, try and build your portfolio and do something germane to kind of your overall goal. And that could be anything in science, right? If you're an engineer or a mathematician, just something in that realm. Because you'll think in the beginning, I have no experience, but if you just start down this path and cobbling it together, you'll be surprised after 5 or 6 years. You'll look back and be very proud. of the steps you've made, or the rungs on the ladder. So I was looking for internships my first year of my PhD. And I had a department head at Carolina look at me and said, why would you want to go and waste a career in science policy? You need to be at a tier 1 research institution. Anything else is a waste. And I was shocked. This is the department head who I was hoping would be lifting me up and saying, yes, do whatever you want. We're going to support you and you know, give you that that skill set and help you with that and help you pursue your dreams. But instead, I was kind of kicked in the knees. And I had an advisor that was really kind of a jerk about it, saying, you know, you've got to be in my lab 24 hours a day. You can't do these internships. Well, I did the internships anyway. I just did them really early in the morning. And so I worked out deals where I could go from like 7 to 9 and do internships at Sigma Psi, the Southern Technology Council, you know, just to get some basic experience and a network. And I was still in the lab before my professor and the other students at 8:30 or 9. So my first job was actually as a regulator, like Dr. Goodson. You know, it's interesting. I see all these great PhD students here, and it's wonderful because you know, I was pursuing the AGU Science Policy Fellowship, and you know, DC's not far from Raleigh, so it didn't seem like a long way to go, right? But we did not want to go to DC, so I was kind of going in this with the Hail Mary pass, like, you know, hey, I want to work for a senator, but can I work in their local state office? So I got a finalist interview, and I said, but look, I can't go to DC, and I knew I was taking myself out of the running because my wife had said, no, we don't want to leave Raleigh. I've got a great job here. So I was constricted even more on my policy options. So there was a job opportunity in coastal management. Here I am, a marine geologist, marine geophysicist. There's a job in Raleigh. You know, we're living in a suburb of Raleigh. I'm getting ready to graduate from Chapel Hill. That is policy related, and it deals with coastal management. It seemed like a perfect fit. The starting salary was horrible. I was coming in, you know, with a master's, almost had my PhD, but I thought, you know what? The fit is too good to be true. It's tough enough to figure out a science policy job, but here I've got this one on a platter right in my hometown. I'm going to take it. I'm going to hope everything else falls into place. So that's another piece of advice for y'all. Sometimes take the job for that experience, even if it's for a year. And a lot of times the money will follow, and it did in my case. I got it kind of a livable wage after that. But so I ended up, but here was the problem. I had an advisor that I struggled with that said, oh, sure, you'll be done. Sure, you'll be done. This was now 4.5 years after I started my PhD with a master's. I worked another 18 months in coastal management full time before I actually defended my dissertation. So those were the worst 18 months of my life. 40 hours in Raleigh, 40 hours in Chapel Hill. Essentially did not see my wife a lot. But my job was really cool, and they let me work 4 10-hour days. I could spend all day Friday in the lab, all day Saturday in the lab. I could work nights. So I got it done. Ended up getting the PhD, doing the coastal management gig for about 6.5 years. Got tied in with some legislators. A crazy thing happened in North Carolina in the 2010 election, in that the General Assembly flipped from Democratic control to Republican control of both chambers of the State House in the first time in 141 years. And I saw this as an opportunity. I knew some people that had been minority members that were now going to be majority members. And I said, you know what, I would love to work at a legislative level. Had no idea what that meant. I said, but I would think that you would need somebody giving you science advice, and fell into a position and convinced them to hire me as the science advisor for the state Senate. And I got to hold that position for 6.5 years until I moved over to UNC to run the collaboratory that the legislature set up, which is kind of a legislative think tank to do research for them, utilizing all of the campuses in our system. So it's been a really crazy ride. I've had a lot of luck. I've made some of that luck. A lot of it has just been right place at the right time. And I will say, going in at a high level like that, I was kind of under the radar in an executive branch position. But when you go into a position where you're advising the leader of a Senate chamber or a House chamber, the speaker, and you all of a sudden are wrapped in that partisan mantle. So I took on the Republican partisan mantle of science policy, and that was a challenge. But that's, I was, I didn't really realize at the time that it would actually become a scarlet letter on my shoulder when I wanted to leave politics and get back into research, academia, science policy, and especially in the hyperpartisan nature of today. It was a challenge because I was labeled as an R, and I think it could have also been a challenge being labeled as a D because you were at that level. But I kind of made that choice. But that's kind of my story in a nutshell, and I'd love to take questions later. But very much like Dr. Goodson, is kind of we forged our own path, and it was an evolution of sorts, and I wouldn't do it any other way. So that's my story.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Allison Smith. As Deborah mentioned, I'm currently with Louisville Metro Government. I also teach part-time at the University of Louisville in the biology department. Unlike Dr. Warren, I never really made a decision to go into policy. It just kind of happened. I looked up one day and I was doing policy and really liked it. So I did a PhD in biology at the University of Louisville. I am by training an aquatic ecologist. So I study climate change effects on freshwater ecosystems. So I spent my days growing zooplankton in a laboratory and chasing freshwater jellyfish across the state of Kentucky, and got a couple publications out of it. And 6.5 years in, finished my PhD. At that point, I was like most PhD students looking for an academic position at a tier 1 research institute. Those doors don't always open. And so I had an opportunity to take a postdoc position at the Center for Environmental Policy and Management, which is actually housed at the University of Louisville in the sociology department, where a lot of policy research is done. So at CEPM, I learned for the first time about environmental justice. So I had been in grad school 6.5 years and had not ever heard the phrase environmental justice, which is amazing to me looking back. And so in my, freshman level biology course, you can believe they get a whole lecture on environmental justice. At CEPM, we did a lot of different work, and I learned more than just about, the environment that I was used to studying, but I learned about housing issues and how that is an environmental issue as well, about our waterways and how that in fact affects public health. And I learned about brownfields. That was a big part of what we did at CEPM. We did the community engagement for the city's brownfields program. So if you're not familiar, brownfields are contaminated sites, usually sites of former industry or a former gas station or dry cleaner that has left behind contamination in the soil or groundwater. So I did, that was really where I got my feet wet doing community engagement. So standing up in front of the public at a meeting, trying to explain what the EPA had just said for people that live in a neighborhood that has been contaminated by a former pesticide manufacturer. Those are not always easy meetings. And so it was kind of trial by fire. But I learned so much about the knowledge that communities have about their own neighborhood, about their own environment, and how that often gets overlooked by the people who are actually making the decisions. So I did a lot of writing at CEPM. We did a lot of research on environmental justice issues, specifically around brownfields, but other areas as well. When the funding for that postdoc ended, it turned out that the city was looking for a new brownfields program manager. And so I took that position. I had never intended to work in local government, but it seemed like an interesting opportunity. I was originally hired just to do brownfields. Hold on one second. Sorry, I had to yell at my dog. So I originally took the position of Brownfield's program manager for the city of Louisville. And that entails basically identifying, assessing, remediating, and eventually redeveloping contaminated sites. That also involves a lot of community engagement on behalf of the local government. So I manage EPA grants, a revolving loan fund. I learned things that no biologist should learn, like the real estate market, development practices, tax increment financing, just all kinds of lovely things that they do not teach in grad school in the biology department. But it has really been an interesting journey. So in addition to my responsibilities in brownfields at Louisville Metro Government, I also took on their community engagement. It was not something that most local governments are known for doing a good job at, talking to the public in a way that is authentic and that is accessible and that actually listens. So I advise other departments and agencies on how best to do that. I have helped write policies on how to engage with the public. And I feel that that's been one of my greatest contributions to Louisville Metro. I also oversee the sustainability initiatives, and this is where policy has really been a big part of what I do. We have a commitment to be 100% clean energy by 2040. How we get there is going to be determined by policy. Unfortunately, our state government is not going to help a lot with that, so we are looking very optimistically to the federal administration to figure out how we meet those goals. In addition to that, I'm what they call at government the resident academic. So I have been asked to participate in multi-pollutant stakeholder groups for our air pollution control district. I've been asked to help on the board of our Superfund Research Center. Anytime research is needed on a topic, I'm kind of the go-to. So when you think about policy, it's not just the policy, it's the research that goes into it. And I'm often researching things that are not about freshwater jellyfish. But in a PhD program, you learn how to do research. You learn how to take a huge amount of information and condense it all, and then hopefully translate it into something that other people understand. I do want to say that working in local government is not easy. I tell my students all the time, if you really want to have an impact, get involved at the local government, right? All the regulations and everything are made at the federal level. But if you want to have an impact, it's the local level, because that's where you have direct access to decision makers. So I field phone calls and emails from constituents. I also had a 20-minute discussion about LED lighting in the baking aisle of Kroger not too long ago. So you are very accessible when you're in local government. But working in local government, I think one of the biggest challenges this past year, I'm sure everyone is aware that on March 13th, 2020 in Louisville, Kentucky, Breonna Taylor was killed by Louisville Metro Police. And unfortunately, when you work for the city, you become an anonymous city employee, and you are responsible for everything that happens in your city. And that can be very difficult, a very difficult position to be in. So in addition to dealing with COVID, spending my evenings at protests down at Jefferson Square, and then going to work the next day and talking to people who had made decisions that led us to where we were. I'm not going to lie, it was one of the hardest years I've had in government. But despite that, I am glad to be in a position where I can influence policy, where I can advocate for the people who aren't at the table. And I can stand up for those who have not been heard. So as difficult it has been, I am grateful for the opportunity to be in local government, and thank you for having me here today. And like Dr. Warren, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Allison. Last but not least is Artie.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. As Debbie mentioned at the outset of this discussion, my name is Arti Garg, and I'm the founder and chair of an organization called Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally. I use ESAL as our acronym. ESAL is an all-volunteer organization. We sort of have a national reach. We're a nonprofit, 501c3, and our mission is pretty straightforward. We want to increase the number of scientists and engineers who are engaged with their local governments and local communities. Since everyone else has shared some stories about their background, I thought I'd spend a few minutes doing the same as to why ESAL exists and how it came about. I founded ESAL because I noticed it seemed like there was a little bit of a gap in the science policy world about how to engage locally and the importance of people with STEM backgrounds engaging locally. As Debbie has already mentioned, my first experience with science policy happened in Washington, D.C. as a Christine Mirzayan Science Policy Fellow. And it was a great experience. Debbie is a great mentor. You should listen to her when she tells you to do stuff. But after, I was still in the middle of my PhD when I was in a National Academies Fellow. And through the fellowship, I became convinced that, I was really interested in policy and I wanted to continue working in that space. And to me, the obvious next step was to come back to Washington, D.C. after I finished my PhD, which is what I did. I was a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow. I was a Congressional Fellow sponsored by the American Physical Society, where I worked not anywhere close to local engagement. I actually worked for the House Foreign Affairs Committee. After my fellowship, I ended up eventually at the White House Office of Management and Budget as a civil servant. And so I thought, talk about far away from local policy engagement. I was working in the White House, working on federal R&D investment policy, in many cases on international scientific collaborations. However, like a lot of people with backgrounds in STEM, life, trying to balance families, my significant other's career, life brought me back to California where I live now. And for some reason, I decided that what I wanted to do when I moved back was go dive headfirst back into technical work and work as a data scientist. And so I left government, I left policy altogether and, started on a very different path, it would seem. But just like everyone else on this panel has said, policy has a way of finding you, especially local policy. That's basically what happened to me. After a while, I found that I missed working in government, or I missed working with policy. And what I ended up doing was applying to be appointed to a city task force. And after a few years of serving on that task force, I started to wonder, I can't possibly be the only AAAS fellow who left their fellowship, left Washington, D.C., and ended up going into local municipal government. And so I sent out, there's a AAAS fellowship alumni listserv. I sent an email to it asking whether anyone else had had a similar experience as me. And what I discovered from the responses I got quite a few responses, but they were more, no, I haven't. And I really wish I knew more and I could get involved with my local government. So even former AAAS fellows who have a high degree of knowledge, I will say, about science policy and government and policy in general, didn't have enough information to really feel comfortable about engaging with local government. So through that initial email, which led to a few phone calls, eventually led to the launch of Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally. And after we launched the organization, we actually conducted a civics engagement survey, and we discovered that my experience and the experience of those of us who started ESAL was not unique. And I'm trying to multitask and share some links while I'm speaking, so hopefully you can see them. I just shared the output of our survey, but what we found is that of the people that we surveyed, and it was a self-identified group of people who are already more interested in policy, I would say, than the average person, the average scientist, this knowledge gap persists. People have some interest in local policy, but they really don't know where to begin. And they don't know what it entails, what opportunities exist, and what commitment it would take. And so we sort of set out to fill that, because we realized that if our mission as an organization is to increase the number of people with STEM backgrounds engaging at the local level, we probably have to fill some information gaps too. So we sort of have two main activity streams, or two main goals as an organization. First, we seek to inspire people who have STEM backgrounds to get involved with their local communities, get involved with your local government, because that's, as pretty much all of the speakers before me have said, that's where you can have a really significant and deep impact. And so we try to tell and share the stories of engineers and scientists who, like all three of my fellow panelists, who have made significant contributions to their local communities and their local governments. And we also try to talk about organizations that are working at the nexus of STEM and local government or local community. And finally, especially in the last year, we've really tried to increase the amount of issue-based content that we provide, because we understand that sometimes it may not be so obvious how a policy issue you care about, like say climate change, has a significant number of local dimensions to it. In fact, I've heard people say that maybe some of the most powerful people to make a difference in climate change are actually state officials, the state public utility commissioners, who have a lot of control over what kind of electricity generation gets onto the grid. And so we're trying to help people understand some of these local dimensions to policy making and science policy issues that you may not always hear about. And you may think all of the solutions are in Washington, D.C. And I'm here to tell you they're definitely not. And in addition to our blog, we also hold events that do the same thing. We try to have career panels to feature speakers to talk about what led them to get involved in local government and what kind of impact they've had. And then also to talk more specifically about the local dimensions of STEM related issues and maybe the STEM related dimensions of local issues. So just to give another example that's a little bit timely right now, we did an event on election security and election technology last fall. I think maybe after the last 6 months or so, there's probably an increased appreciation for how important local and state governments are to voting technology, voting policy, the conduct of elections. But before that, it might not have been obvious just how important your county government is to your ability to vote and vote easily. So that's kind of our first, that's our first goal, is to first inspire you to become involved in local government. Our second goal as an organization is, once we've inspired you, we want to make you successful. So our goal is to provide you with the resources you need to be successful in whatever it is you try to do through your local engagement. So I'm going to share a whole bunch of links on the website, and I'm happy to talk about all of them in more detail. But we have been creating a lot of different resources that we make available to anyone on our website to give you step-by-step guides on different ways you can engage, either to advocate for a policy or to just share some knowledge and expertise with local decision makers, or to serve in the way that all three of my fellow panelists have dedicated their careers to serving their communities by bringing their scientific knowledge and also just the people that they are to the work that they do. Beyond that, we've introduced in the last year workshops that we can really tailor and customize to your group. I think some of the people in this chat, I noticed as you all introduced yourselves, maybe a few of you have attended our workshops. And I'm super excited to see you here as well, continuing to be interested in what you can do as a scientist or engineer at the local level. So just to make sure we have plenty of time for everyone to ask questions, I'd like to wrap up simply by saying that I truly believe that scientists and engineers can and should feel empowered to contribute to their local communities. And part of the reason that I am so passionate about ESAL is that I'm so excited to be able to help catalyze that engagement. I think in my dream world, civic and community engagement would be just a normal and expected part of what it means to be a scientist and engineer. I'm honored to be sharing, to be on the same panel as people who, in my opinion, truly exemplify what it means to use your scientific and STEM background to serve your community. And through ESAL and the work that we do, I'd love to inspire more of you to do the same.
Okay, great. Thank you, Artie. You are so inspiring yourself. So it's good for you to take that and inspire others. So, and not least of which is how you talk and add links at the same time. Okay, so as always, we have a bunch of questions, so we'll try to get through all of them. So the first one is from Ankita, and why don't you go ahead and answer it, Artie, because I think it might be useful, which is, it's common to see climate scientists focusing on environment, air, and water pollution move into science policy. How should scientists with backgrounds in more basic life sciences look for local science policy initiatives? Most of the opportunities available seem to be restricted to the above areas.
So I think that's a great question. And I think there's a few different ways to approach it depending on what you're looking to do. So if you're looking to, and I actually would love for Kenya, maybe you could also answer this question as well. But yeah, I mean, I think that one way to approach this is to look for more advocacy or legislative roles where they're looking for someone who can conduct that kind of background research. And I think the other one is if you're not looking to make a career change, there's a lot of different opportunities to engage with your local government as either an advisor or an advocate through public comments and through other forms of local engagement.
Okay, great. Yeah.
I'll just add that you don't have to be an environmental scientist to be interested in climate change policy. You are a concerned citizen that has a STEM background, so you know the basic fundamentals of science. You know that if the world is getting warmer, you know that there are going to be significant impacts. So I think doing some research just in general on climate change is good. And then looking for local organizations that work with climate change and just partnering with them, you would be surprised at how much you would learn just by connecting with the organization that's doing the work. You'll learn on the way.
So this one I think we'll have Allison answer, which is, with increasingly polarized politics, how do we balance whether or how to publicly advocate on a given issue?
So that is an interesting question. The entire time I was in graduate school, I was told we don't advocate, we don't lobby, we are, impartial researchers. And quite frankly, I think that's bull. We have the knowledge to advocate for better policies, and if not us, then we leave it to other people to make those policies who don't have that experience. I do agree that it is difficult in a polarized environment. I live in a blue dot in a very red state. There's a Republican supermajority in our state house, but I have a very progressive mayor at the time, right now, as it comes to climate change. And so it is difficult, and it's one of those things where you really have to pick your battles. But I think that as scientists, especially when I get comments from the public who are scientists and who can speak with authority, that gives me more ammunition to fight for those policies that I want. It's not just me, it's these constituents who also have knowledge on that.
Okay, thanks, Allison. Yeah, Jeff, you answered this question in writing, but I'd like you to answer it verbally, which is, this is from Morgan. I really appreciate your perspective on making your own luck or job space. Any more advice on opening moves to start a conversation to create your own job?
Yeah, it all starts with that first step, right? It's the long journey begins with the first step, and relationships are very important. And I know in today's hyper fast society where things can be gained almost instantaneously on the internet or on your device, you got to get to just good old fashioned face to face or Zoom to Zoom. It should still be virtual or on the phone. And you've got to start meeting people. So find an issue that's important to you, or an organization that's handling an issue that's important to you, whether it's a nonprofit or a unit of government, or at a state level or a local level, and just get to know those people. Get to meet them one at a time, find out what they do, find out more about their organization. And the more you get to know them, you will find opportunities, because if you know them and you come in and say, hey, I've got a science background, I almost have my PhD, or I'm working on my PhD, or I've just got my PhD. I'd love to be able to help you out. They will have stuff for you to do. They'll say, hey, could you do some lit reviews for me at night? I mean, that would be great. And, it's these small steps, but it's even like taking the new job. You can never gauge how successful you are in a new job after the first month. You've got to really look back after a year, because you feel overwhelmed. You don't feel like you've made enough progress. But after a year, you kind of look back and say, oh, wow, there's actually some real steps here. So it's just one relationship at a time. And eventually that relationship is going to lead to an introduction to somebody else in another organization, and it's going to expand your network just one person at a time. And eventually you'll get to make your own luck, because you'll be, if you're working anywhere in government, it's not that big of a place. I know it seems overwhelming if you've never worked in it, but somebody's going to be a staff member that is really good friends with an elected official, who's really good friends with an appointed commissioner, who's really good friends with a state legislator, who's really good friends with a chairman of a budget committee in the Senate. And all of a sudden, a lot of people that you can then volunteer for, learn about more for, and eventually have job opportunities with. So it's a really complex question. And there are a lot of different ways to move forward with that, but that's probably a good general approach that I would throw out there.
And Allison, do you want to say something?
Yes, I just want to add, I learned this in graduate school. You mentioned the Kentucky Academy of Sciences. Anytime you're invited to give a presentation, do it. That's how I met Artie. Every presentation opportunity, take it. And then I just want to share the best job advice I have ever been given was someone told me, take whatever job they'll give you and make it what you want. So I will leave you with that.
And yes, actually, Allison, while we're on that topic, another question which you'd also answered in writing, but I think it's good to do so, to talk about again, which is what kind of skills are best to highlight when applying for local state policy positions?
Sure, and I think it's a pretty straightforward answer, because most likely the job that you apply for is not going to be an exact match to that little niche that you studied in grad school. My job was never about freshwater jellyfish, but as I mentioned in my presentation, you can talk about your ability to do research, your ability to take very complex ideas and translate them for the public. This is something that I hope that they are starting to teach in grad school, is being able to translate very complex scientific information about, POCs and VOCs and PAHs and groundwater and soil. How do I explain that to the public without using 100 acronyms? That is a key skill that most people in government don't have the ability to do, and most scientists don't. So if you can work on that, give presentations at the local gardening club if you're in botany. Give presentations to the neighborhood association that's worried about the creek in their backyard. Learn how to speak to the public, because that's who you serve in local government.
Well, thanks. And Kenny, you were trying to get in here too.
I think Allison really broke it down. I think she really broke it down. Writing skills are important as well. If you're a PhD student, you know how to write. So, having reports, things like that. But I'm just concurring with Allison. Being able to translate information that's very complex to the everyday person is really important. And so if you can do that, that's a very invaluable skill to have.
Yeah, I think that's also a good time to mention that there are so many free workshops available today that were not in the past, from the National Science Policy Network. The American Geophysical Union has a bunch. I mean, if you go on Twitter, if you're part of your science policy club, it is phenomenal. Like, where we went from absolutely zero, like when I first started, to it seems like to me there's like one every single week. So be sure to take advantage of those, and don't just listen, but practice, in writing, in the real world, and so forth. I'm and another colleague are working on setting up something up in Medium, where people can, basically have an opportunity to publish things, practice communication for the general public. Take advantage of those opportunities when they come up, even though you might find it challenging. It's not for grade, guys. Not everything's for grade. Are you going to say something?
Yeah, I think I wanted to add one thing that I found is kind of different about local government compared to federal government, and something to think about. I can't speak to necessarily the fellowship application process, but I can speak to fellows that I've seen go on to have, to get permanent positions in, say, state government, which is there's a degree of personalness to local government that just doesn't exist in the same way at the federal level. Yes, it's true you have to build relationships and negotiate in the federal government, but there's a different dimension in local government where when you're making decisions, it's your neighbor that's affected. And I think the ability to really understand and empathize with the communities in which you're doing work is important. And what I've seen is some of the amazing fellows who have gone on, state policy fellows who've gone on to longstanding or to permanent positions in their state government, just have an amazing ability to really understand and connect with the communities that they're serving. And I would love to say that's true at every level of government, but I just think it's a lot more true when you're living and working in the same community as the people you're serving. So I just want to add that dimension to this discussion, which is a little different than the federal discussion.
In fact, this is actually good because it leads into another question that's way, which is how can I get involved in local government? So Artie, you were like on a board, for example, things like that. Did you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I got interrupted by a 4-year-old, but yes. So yes, I'm happy to talk about getting involved. So I got involved in through being appointed to a municipal task force, and now I'm a city commissioner. And so there are a lot of sort of volunteer part-time opportunities to be involved in local government. I see that there's also somebody in the chat who asked about if you have a physician background. In fact, one of my fellow commissioners is a physician. She's also the chief administrator of a health system. And she brings a lot of her perspective on community health to the work we do on our Community Services Commission. So I think that's one way to get involved, especially if you're not looking to do a career change right away. Again, fellowships are another great entry point. We've also featured a number of students who've done part-time internships with state legislators to provide the kind of advice that they don't always have access to, and that can turn into a career change opportunity as well. So I'll just share those few sort of non-formal avenues, and I think we've heard some other ones as well.
And I'll just add that as someone who does community engagement, go to a public meeting, submit comments, write a letter to the editor. You know, everyone thinks it's my responsibility to make these things happen, but the more comments that I have, the more people I can say support it, the more likely I am to be able to make that happen. So don't think it has to be a formal relationship. Just get involved as a citizen, as a resident, get involved in those activities and get to know the people in your local government.
I'd like to add to that too. One of the things that we're trying to do here with the Tuscaloosa County Citizens Climate Lobby is to really talk to the mayor and talk to city council leaders about looking at climate change policy in our city. We gave them a report card when they were candidates because we just had a municipal election here in Tuscaloosa. And it was interesting that something the mayor had said that, you know, just kind of, I thought, no, that's not true, is he said that climate policy starts mostly at the state level. And that's not necessarily the truth. And so getting your city officials to understand that you can do climate change policy at a local level. It may not be necessarily you doing a major climate change policy or solar energy or renewable energy policy, but it could be something as weathering old houses, you know, using energy efficiency lighting, things like that, building energy efficiency buildings, things like that. So, you know, you can definitely get them to do that at a local level. You can advocate for that.
So our last question is, you know, talking about educational background, like this person has a master's in science, technology, policy. They're looking at a PhD in technology policy. You know, what do you think about educational careers and, you know, educational degrees? You know, to what degree is a policy-related degree needed? Anybody?
I'll take a stab at this because I struggled when I started the legislature with, do I use the title doctor, right? I mean, I decided after about a week that I'm going to go ahead and put doctor in front of my name, and it actually paid off very well because it turned out to be, the legislative building was a building full of egos, right? A building full of titles. Everybody was honorable or senator or representative, and having the doctor up there actually put me, I would say, on a level playing field or even above that, because a lot of folks not familiar with graduate education are overwhelmed and sheepish about a master's degree or a PhD. And they immediately assign you, the thought that, oh, you've got to be really smart at what you do, which can be dangerous because then they're asking you to answer questions you may not know anything about. And you've got to be real open about that, to say, look, I can, I've got a couple hours this afternoon. I will go and research this, but right now I'm not comfortable giving you an answer on this policy proposal or this question because I'm not a wildlife biologist, right? Or I'm not a jellyfish specialist. So I've got to go and do some work. But those graduate degrees really help out. And I found out that PhD really gave some walking around cred. It didn't even really at that point matter what it was in. It was just the letters behind your name. It turned out to be very effective for me.
So the one thing I will say, just in my own personal experience, is that, because I'm sure a lot of people don't have PhDs, is that when I started, I only had a bachelor's degree in engineering. And I was still, able to be very active in my 20s at the local level, at the state level, all through the League of Women Voters, things, on all sorts of different issues. So I also, for those of you who don't have PhDs out there, I don't want to encourage you that that's not a barrier. Your scientific knowledge, particularly, at the local level, there aren't that many people with PhDs, right? There aren't that many people with science degrees. And so therefore you might be the only person in the room, going back to offering public comment on issues that are happening in your community. In my community here in Pittsburgh, there's like a lot of flooding. And I think, even though we're an engineering town in Pittsburgh, still, certainly can go to the city council meeting and make your thoughts known. And, you have as much of a voice as anybody else. So, don't, and don't let age be a barrier. Don't let degrees be a barrier. Just get involved in some way. And if you're at all leery about going alone, join an organization and they will teach you how to do things. And I think that's what I learned from League of Voters, is how to do consensus development, which then became my career for 18 years at the National Academy of Sciences and at the White House when I was at doing PCAS, President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. I learned all that from volunteers, from very smart women in Texas who knew how to do consensus development. So with that, we're sort of at the end of the time, but I wanted to make sure everybody had a chance to just say any last 1 minute thought that people.
I wanted to answer one of the questions.
Okay,
can
sure.
Can I do
Yeah,
that?
go ahead.
Someone in the chat or the question and answer asked about being a doctor, MD, doing policy work, and I wanted to answer that. I went to CCL's international conference in DC a couple of years, and there were physicians that were actually doing talks about climate health. And it's going to be very important in the future because with our climate changing, they're seeing different types of diseases that they haven't seen in particular. And I would encourage you to research Catherine Flowers. She's an environmental activist here in Alabama. And she has done great work on wastewater contamination in the Black Belt in Lowndes County. And I think there was a study that the UN did that they found, I think it was tapeworm or something, in our Alabama Black Belt community. If I think about it, I'll email you the article, Dr. Stine. But all of that is due to the increased temperatures in our in our atmosphere. And so we're going to definitely need doctors to be savvy about the impacts of climate change on environmental health. So I just wanted to bring that up. And
Great.
are we supposed to say anything else about ourselves before?
Well, no, I just want to have, if you have any, like, this is like your one last thing, like if you have one sentence that you want everybody to remember, what would it be?
I'll start since I was talking, and I'll be quick. Just follow your passion. Just follow your passion.
That's a good one. Okay, how about you, Jeff?
I'm gonna have to echo follow your passion, but don't be afraid. Some of your opportunities will be totally nonpartisan, and you can be just a neutral government employee, civil servant, but don't feel nervous to go after those partisan spots. They can be very rewarding. It does kind of sequester you in some ways and may limit future opportunities, but it opens up some other opportunities as well. So if you're talking about high level, like, advisors to cabinet officials at the highest levels, those are all going to be partisan level type appointments, and don't be afraid to pursue those. If the majority of your philosophies align with the majority of the philosophies, because they'll never 100% line up. But if you're going to pursue that type, make sure you're similar, because otherwise you're going to be put into some weird situations where you may not be supporting the policies, and it's not going to work out for anybody.
Okay, great. Thanks. Allison?
First, I just want to back up something that Kenya said. Climate change is going to take on a whole new aspect after the COVID pandemic. When we think about environmental health, when we think about our environmental justice community. So if you are passionate about climate change, but you're interested in medicine, I strongly recommend public health. We are going to be investing huge sums of funding into our public health departments, because we saw what happened when we underfunded them for the last 30 years. So keep that as open as a possibility. The one thing I want you to remember is, if you do take our advice and you contact your local government or you submit a public comment, when you go to write that nasty email, please remember it might be me reading it. So just keep that in mind.
Yes, policymakers are people too. Be nice. Okay, Artie, the last word.
Sure. So I usually start my presentations by reminding people that decisions are made by those who show up. It's a quote I totally admit it, first heard it on West Wing, but I always think that's good inspiration for why you should really think about your local government, your local community as a place that you can make change, because that's where you can show up over and over again. That's what you need to really make a difference, is to constantly engage with the decision makers and your community members. So today I will end by reminding you that decisions are made by those who show up. So show up and do what you can when you do.
Great. Thank you very much. So let us virtually thank all our speakers. I will applaud for everybody, since unfortunately we cannot hear or see anybody. But thank you all very much. Our next webinar, which will be sometime in a month, will probably be on, getting that government job. How do you do it? So that is the next focus of our series, because I figure a lot of you out there are really, really looking for jobs right now as you get close to graduating. So thanks again to our speakers. We really appreciate your time. And as somebody just typed in, you are so inspiring. Thanks for all your hard work. Bye-bye, everybody.